In Luke 7, Simon the Pharisee invites Jesus to come eat at his house, and while the meal is going on, a sinful woman shows up and washes Jesus' feet with her tears and pours expensive perfume on his head. Simon tells himself that this man must not be a prophet, otherwise he would know who is touching him. Jesus responds by telling him the parable of the two debtors, a parable in which two men owe a borrower one 50 denarii and the other one 500. When the borrower sees that neither of them will be able to pay their debt, he forgives both of them. And Jesus then asks Simon who will love the borrower more, the one who owed 50 or the one who owed 500. Simon responds that the one who owed more money, obviously. And then Jesus uses this parable to basically illustrate the fact that this woman has done a beautiful thing, and because she has a bigger debt to pay, she loves Jesus more, implying that maybe Simon the Pharisee will not be forgiven. This scene is beautiful, and the parable is simple and it is deep, but it's even deeper when you realize the literary structure that the whole scene and the parable is contained within. What I mean is that this parable is written within a chiasm, and chiasms are meant to make us think even deeper about the text. And if you don't know what a chiasm is, don't worry, because I'm here to explain. Bible nerds, rejoice. You're welcome. Now I'm here on my desk because I'm about to use my iPad to explain to you how this parable is in a chiasm and how that really enriches the meaning of this whole story and the parable itself. Now let me say this. There's a lot of depth in this story and a lot of meaning in this story without understanding chiasms, but this is the kind of thing that really enriches our reading of scripture, and I hope it really does that for you. So without further ado, to the iPad we go. So we're now at my iPad, and before we go on, let me explain to you why I think explaining this is important, because one of the things that we have to understand is that the people of Jesus' time told stories differently than the way that we tell them. We are basically used to a 3-act play, if you will. And the way that that usually works is that we have an introduction, a middle, and a conclusion. All right. And usually the climax of this way of telling a story is between the middle and the conclusion. There's something that sort of closes out our story, and this is the climax of it. But the way that a chiasm works is a different kind of structure. And in a chiasm, you also have 3 parts. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But in a chiasm, the most important part of the story is in the middle. In this, there is an introduction that sort of introduces us to the scene. But the middle is basically what informs all the other parts that are happening on either side of it. The middle is really kind of like what usually is the climax of the story, or the part that informs the other 2 parts that are next to it. And it's a very different way to reading a story. How this works in the passage that we're looking at, which is in Luke 7, okay, is that we basically have the opening of our story in which Jesus gets invited to eat at Simon the Pharisee's house. And then what's in the middle is the parable. So if you look over here, a certain creditor had 2 debtors, 500 denarii, the other 150, and they could not pay it, so they canceled the debts. And then what's in the middle of the middle, let me do it in another color here so you see, is this question. Now, which of them will love him more? The reason why this question is really important, and it's right in the middle of everything, okay? And let me just point out the 2 other parts of the story. Let me do it in blue here for you so you see them separated really nicely. So that's one part. Then we have our middle, which is highlighted in green. And then we have the other part. Again, this is arranged in a chiasm. And the middle is the most important part of this whole story that we're seeing. The middle is the parable. And so we kind of have to ask ourselves, what is the parable telling us that then has something to do with the rest of the story? And the middle of the middle is this question in which Jesus says, now which of them will love him more? The reason why this question is really important is because usually if you're going to tell a story about debt, and this is the case in many of the wisdom literature, for example, that if you're going to tell a story about debt, usually the person that is the bad person is the one that owes the most money. But with this question, there's a reversal of fates, if you will, because this question makes the story, the parable that Jesus tells, not about the amount of money that is owed, but about how much the person who is forgiven the most is going to love the borrower more. This question of now which of them will love him more changes everything, because this is no longer about debt, but it is about love. This actually changes the fact that Simon the Pharisee, before understanding this, was judging wrongly. That's why after he gives his answer, Jesus tells him, you have judged rightly. And Jesus, again, is flipping everything on its head. Now, this woman, instead of being seen as the bad one, Jesus is portraying her as the good one. Whereas Simon the Pharisee showed her no hospitality, he says, this woman, you gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not stopped kissing me. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. And so the basic hospitality, and as I've mentioned in other videos that I've made, hospitality in the time of Jesus was a huge, huge deal. And so basically, it seems as though Simon did not show the basic hospitality to Jesus by just providing a way for him to wash his feet. But this woman has. And it's not because of a matter of debt, is because she loves him more. Now, what's interesting about this story is that other than knowing that she's a sinner, we don't know what propelled her to do this. But we do know that the difference between Simon and this woman is a degree to which they love Jesus. And that's what he makes this woman and what she's doing about. In verse 47, it says, therefore I tell you, her sins, which were many, and Jesus admits this woman's sins were many, have been forgiven, hence she has shown great love. And that, again, this woman was already forgiven when she walked in. We don't know if she had a conversation with Jesus before. We don't know if they had a meeting. All we know is that she walks in, and probably there was an interaction between them before. But again, what is at the center of this whole passage is this parable that's supposed to make us realize that debt, seen through the eyes of loving somebody who would forgive you of your debt, makes you love that person. And that's what has happened here. Simon doesn't think he has anything to be forgiven about, and therefore has absolutely no affection for Jesus. But this woman, who was forgiven of her sins, has great affection for Jesus. One of the things that chiasm is supposed to do is help us meditate on what we're reading, because it makes us go to the beginning, and then it makes us go to the middle, and then go to the next part, but then it makes us go back to the beginning, and so on and so on. It's supposed to be a cycle that helps us go back and meditate on what's happening here. And as I mentioned, without knowing anything about chiasms, there's a lot of depth here, and there's a lot of things to learn. But when you look at this passage and you see it in the way that it was arranged, that this parable is in the middle of these two things, you go back and you begin to notice this reversal. In a normal circumstance, if you're going to tell a moral story about debt, you usually make the greater debtor the bad one. But in this case, because this is a question of love, it changes everything. And that's probably the biggest lesson that this whole passage has, is that love changes everything. Thank you so much for watching. And if you like what I'm doing around here, please consider subscribing to our channel. And we have done other videos about parables, and you can go watch them somewhere here in our playlist. And I guess I'll catch you on the next one.